Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a horror, mystery, and thriller film called The Hole. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. After disappearing for 18 days, a dirty and bloody Liz Dunn finally resurfaces and heads to her school, where she tries calling for help before finally collapsing on the floor. It isn't long before the entire area is surrounded by cops and reporters, who all talk about the 4 missing teenagers. Meanwhile, Liz is quickly taken to the hospital to receive medical attention, but she struggles to cooperate with the doctor and nurse. Moments later, Liz remembers what happened to her and tries her best not to think about it. Then, a psychiatrist, Dr. Horwood, visits Liz, saying she's there to help her. She also takes Liz to another room where they eventually start their session. After setting up the camera, Dr. Horwood tells Liz to relax and speak whenever she's ready. Seconds later, Liz talks about how things work at her school, Brayborn. Liz says she's been a nobody for years, only watching from the edges. She has a best friend named Martin Taylor who believes it's easy to control greedy people. At the same time, Liz has a huge crush on the famous Mike Steele, an American student. However, Martin tries to discourage Liz from focusing all her attention on Mike, saying he's just a regular guy like the rest of them. Unfortunately, Liz is head over heels for Mike, and because of that, she fails to notice that Martin has feelings for her. Meanwhile, Mike talks to his friend, Jeff Bingham, about their school field trip, thinking of ways to ditch it. On the other hand, Liz asks the popular Frankie Smith to help deal with her messed up hair. Liz has decided to dye her hair blonde, thinking Mike will notice it, but Frankie says it won't make a difference. Frankie also says Mike isn't that wonderful, and as she leaves, Liz thanks her for being nice to her. One day, Liz tries to approach Mike, only to notice that all the blonde girls are looking and laughing at her. So she changes the color of her hair again and makes it red, realizing she doesn't want to be like the other young ladies who are crazy for Mike. Later that day, a frustrated Liz talks to Martin and tells him how sad she is that Mike doesn't even know she exists. However, Martin tells Liz he knows how to cheer her up. It isn't long before Martin talks to Jeff, Frankie, and Mike about how they can avoid the school trip. Martin easily finds a way to remove their names from the list of students joining the field trip, making sure that their school and parents won't suspect something is wrong. Then, the students eventually leave for the field trip while the others go home, and Martin and his group meet in the woods. Moments later, Martin takes out the keys to an underground fallout shelter where Liz and the 3 other students plan to stay until the field trip is over. Then, they all start going down the shelter, not noticing how unstable the ladder is. Meanwhile, Liz asks Martin if he thinks Mike will fall in love with her while they're in the bunker, but her best friend doesn't answer her question and just tells her to be careful. After that, Martin finally closes the hatch and leaves, but Jeff soon turns on the lights in the shelter. Naturally, they immediately start having fun and playing silly games, and then they take out and organize everything they will use for their time there. At the same time, Liz finally gets Mike's attention when she offers him some food. That night, Jeff can't help but wonder what will happen to them if Martin doesn't come back. Unfortunately, that upsets Frankie, thinking Jeff will jinx them. Of course, Jeff is only trying to scare Frankie, and clearly he succeeded. In the present, Dr. Horwood asks Liz what happened on the 3rd day when Martin was supposed to let them out. However, Liz says she doesn't remember and it's obvious that she's scared. So Dr. Horwood assures her she's safe with her and urges her to tell the story. On the 3rd day, Frankie and the 2 guys start to panic when Martin fails to show up on time. Jeff then tries calling Martin using Frankie's phone, but there's no signal down in the shelter. With no other choice, Jeff climbs the ladder and tries calling Martin again, but he still can't get a signal. Later on, the situation gets worse and everyone starts fighting. Still, they try to find another way out of the shelter, only to be disappointed in the end. Then, Liz notices a shadow by the hatch and thinks about waking up Mike, but she eventually decides against it. However, she's unaware that Mike isn't even sleeping. The following day, the 4 students discuss whether anyone is looking for them and why Martin never returned. Frankie can't believe that Martin will just leave them there, saying they're his friends. But Mike questions that and points out he doesn't know anything about the guy. Liz also adds that Martin has no morals, saying everything is just a game to him. In Liz's room, the girl tells Dr. Horwood that Martin didn't come back. Because of that, the cops have arrested a student from Brayborn, a boy whose name won't be revealed to the public for legal reasons. The student was located in the Dominican Republic, where it is believed he was on holiday with his family. Later on, Liz asks Dr. Horwood if Martin will be put in jail for what he's done, and when the doctor says she presumes so, Liz expresses joy. When they begin their session again, Liz tells Dr. Horwood how pitiful their situation was in the shelter. Then, when Mike lies in bed with her one night, she tells him that she thinks Martin is watching them because she saw a shadow past the slat. Liz says Martin is probably teaching her a lesson to show how silly she is for liking Mike, making Mike think she knew what would happen even before they came down there. However, Liz denies that and says that's the only explanation she can think of. At the same time, Liz admits that Martin has feelings for her. Thinking about Martin watching them, Mike looks around the shelter and discovers that the entire place has been bugged. They then pretend that Frankie is sick so that Martin will take pity on them and let them out, and they also make it seem like they're blaming Liz for everything. A few days later, they wake up and see that the hatch is open, and as they leave the bunker, Mike thanks Liz for saving them all. Once Liz is done telling the story, Dr. Horwood praises her for making progress. However, the doctor wants to continue their sessions, saying they still have a lot of work to do. Then, when she leaves, Dr. Horwood talks to DCS Tom Howard on the phone and says Liz thinks she spent the last couple of days in Disneyland. So Howard tells her not to worry and assures her he'll get a confession out of Martin. At the police station, Martin gives the detectives his version of the story, telling them what he did on the last day of school. At the same time, he says he has no motive to lock up a bunch of socialites in a bunker and leave them there. Unfortunately, the detectives don't believe him, and the one asking him questions, Chapman, says Liz has already told them everything. So Martin asks her if she's aware that Liz hates him. Meanwhile, Dr. Horwood finally takes Liz home. Exasperated, Martin tells Chapman that Liz and Frankie are best friends. As it turns out, it's Liz and Frankie's idea to stay in the bunker with Jeff and Mike to get to know the guys better. Then Frankie invites Jeff and tells him to make sure Mike will come with him, and although he's reluctant at first, Mike eventually says he'll join them. Howard is sure that one of the students is lying, telling Dr. Horwood he wants to talk to Liz. However, the doctor is afraid that Howard will mess things up and says she'll get the answers from Liz herself. Then, Dr. Horwood interviews Liz again, but the girl gets mad and leaves when she learns that the cops will release Martin in a few hours. After that, Liz panics when she comes across Mike on her way home, but she realizes her eyes are just playing tricks on her. Then, she smokes once she's in her bedroom, showing that she's not the innocent girl she portrays to be. At the same time, Liz keeps having flashbacks of what really happened in the shelter. Once Martin helps them get into the shelter, the 4 students decide to drink and take substances to their heart's content. Then, Frankie almost sleeps with the guys, but Liz pulls Mike by the hair and stops him. So Frankie eventually leaves, but she makes sure to flash Mike first. However, that night, nothing stops Jeff from sleeping with Frankie, unbothered that there are other people in the room with them. On the other hand, Liz tries inviting Mike to bed, but the guy isn't interested in her. In the present, the cops finally release Martin. Then, Dr. Horwood joins the authorities in investigating the shelter, and Liz watches the news on television. Unfortunately, because of that, Liz becomes overwhelmed and starts having flashbacks again. Because Frankie and Jeff slept together, Mike and Liz decide to leave the bunker. Then, Liz gets disappointed when she learns that Mike plans to visit his ex-girlfriend and tries to leave first, but she discovers that the door is locked. So, the guys try and fail to open the hatch, and they all blame Liz for slamming the door shut. Moments later, Dr. Horwood comes out of the bunker with Gillian, who says the forensics can barely lift a usable print. She also adds that the kids probably mistook the small air vents for microphones, saying lack of food and water would have made them totally confused and paranoid. Dr. Horwood then asks if they have anything to tie Martin to the scene, but Gillian says they don't. Meanwhile, Liz gets scared when Martin shows up at her house unannounced, causing her to run away. However, Martin catches up to her by the river and demands to know why she betrayed him, but Liz says she knew the police would eventually let him go. On the other hand, Dr. Horwood drops by Liz's place too, and gets suspicious when she sees the broken jar that Liz dropped earlier. She then goes upstairs and sees Liz crying in her room, and the girl asks her to get her out of there because she doesn't feel safe. A few minutes later, Dr. Horwood takes Liz out of the house, and the girl's mother sees them on the road. Dr. Horwood then tells Liz to be truthful, and that's when the girl says she wants to go back to the hole to remember everything. Meanwhile, the cops receive a call from an angry Mrs. Dunn, who's threatening to call the Press Police Complaints Commission if they don't find Liz. At the same time, they get a tip about Martin, so they immediately go to where he is. In the woods, Liz goes inside the shelter with Dr. Horwood. There, Liz reveals that she locked the hatch because she didn't want Mike to leave, and the doctor urges her to continue telling the story. Eventually, their food and water supplies start running out, so they talk about what will happen when they no longer have anything to eat or drink. Then, Liz cries out of frustration, so everyone tries to comfort her. Once the water and food are gone, the students get even more depressed. Then, Liz notices someone pass by the door, but she doesn't say a word about it. Sadly, Liz loves Mike so much that all she wants is to be with him, even if that means letting herself and her friends starve. But eventually, Liz gets the attention she wants and finally makes out with Mike. Unfortunately, Jeff interrupts them to let them know that Frankie is sick. With no other choice, Liz goes to the dirty bathroom, where Frankie keeps throwing up. Liz eagerly tells her how good it feels to be kissed by Mike, and she doesn't even care anymore that Frankie slept with the guy she likes. Then, she comforts Frankie and tells her she has a strong feeling they'll get out the next day. That night, Liz finally sleeps with Mike, so she takes the key she's been hiding in her shoe and prepares to open the hatch. However, she gets distracted when she notices Frankie is missing, but she eventually finds her on the bathroom floor. Hearing Liz's screams, the guys rush to the bathroom to see what's happening. Jeff tries to revive Frankie and ignores the blood in her mouth, but unfortunately, the girl's already dead. At the same time, Jeff can't help but blame Liz for what happened. Once they've taken Frankie's body out of the bathroom, they place it in one of the rooms in the shelter. Liz gets pissed that Dr. Horwood seems to be judging her, but the doctor is actually thinking about Frankie's cause of death. As it turns out, Frankie had an eating disorder, and the bleeding came from a tear in her esophagus. Frankie died on the 10th day from heart failure, but Dr. Horwood just keeps that to herself and proceeds to listen to Liz's story. After Frankie's death, Jeff continues to blame Liz and says it's her fault they're stuck down there. Jeff also gets into a fight with Mike when he tries to defuse the tension, and Jeff is mad at him because he didn't care about Frankie. Mike then tries to comfort Liz, and that's when Jeff says he doesn't really blame Liz for Frankie's death. He says he's just going crazy, adding that he keeps thinking he can smell the body. Moments later, Liz tries telling Mike that she has the key to the hatch, only to be interrupted when Jeff opens a can of soda. Without thinking, Mike comes at Jeff and repeatedly bashes his head on the floor, eventually killing him. Again, Dr. Horwood knows how Jeff died, but she doesn't interrupt Liz as she talks. Once Mike calms down, he goes through Jeff's stuff and finds more cans of soda and food. At the same time, Liz discovers a knife inside the guy's bag, so she tells Mike they should just kill themselves. However, Mike refuses and stops Liz from cutting her arm, saying she's kept him going. Then, Mike tells Liz he loves her, so the selfish girl finally decides to unlock and open the hatch. Unfortunately, Mike witnesses as she opens the door, leaving Liz with no choice but to confess that she's always had the key. Finally, Liz admits that everything she did was for Mike because she loves him. But despite that, Mike only gets furious because Liz's selfishness caused their friends' deaths. Enraged, Mike tries coming after Liz, but the ladder breaks as he climbs and he gets himself impaled. After everything that happened, Liz still tries to justify her actions and tells Dr. Horwood that Mike was the reason she breathed. Then, Liz adds that the only consolation she gets is knowing that Mike will never get old and cheat on her. Meanwhile, the doctor tells Liz she needs to confess to the authorities, but the girl refuses and says no one will understand her. Liz also tells the doctor that it's too late, revealing that she did something to Martin. Seconds later, Howard arrives with the cops and Liz starts acting as if Dr. Horwood is hurting her. Howard then informs the doctor that they found Martin's body in the river, along with the key to the hatch. Unfortunately, they conclude that the guy killed himself to escape punishment. At the same time, there's nothing Dr. Horwood can do but look at the spoiled girl, who's so proud of herself for getting away with everything she's done.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.